Table this morning, Congressman Mark Walker, Republican of North Carolina. He sits on the Homeland Security Committee and, of course, represents the Greensboro area of North Carolina, close to, some of your district goes close to the Charlotte area. I just want to start with your reaction of what's happening in your state.
Well, I think it's, first of all, it's a very tragic set of events. Our heart goes out to these families who have suffered loss. As a former minister and having to deal with certain crises over my 15 years as a pastor, immediately your thoughts go to the family. And that's where we first have to start, making sure that we're trying to understand the heartache and the suffering that these families go through, whatever reason for loss of life. So first of all, heart goes out to the families. But some of the things that are going on in our home state makes me sad right now. Yeah.
What about it? I mean, what makes you sad? What do you think it does for the state of what's the impact for your constituents for the state of North Carolina?
Sure. Well, I think there's a huge impact even economically right now. In fact, my wife, who is a medical professional, they canceled the concert or the event that they had this weekend, conference I should say, there in uptown Charlotte. So automatically we're seeing an immediate impact economically. But larger than that, I think it's another burden on our society when it comes to a place that we're not able to get to a place to talk through some of the issues that we're facing right now. I think it's duly incumbent upon leaders, upon pastors, upon county officials, city officials, to make sure that they are coming to the table talking through these issues.
We heard from a gentleman in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who said the difference between Tulsa and Charlotte is in Tulsa they prayed. And they prayed largely because their religious leaders led in the wake of that killing there and asked their followers to come to the church, talk and pray, and sort of making the assumption that didn't happen in Charlotte, North Carolina.
I did read some of those reports, but I think it goes a bit deeper than that. I believe it takes a community to be proactive instead of reactive. Those relationships, to be able to work through a tragedy like we did see in Tulsa, is because there are relationships already developed preemptively in case something does happen. Those are genuine relationships, and I think that makes a difference when you do have a crisis.
What relationships are you talking about?
Well, I think it's intentional incumbent for ministers, for political leaders, for business leaders to come together and begin to talk about how do they resolve some of these race divisions. Now, there are some on the outside that are trying to stoke some of these fires, both on the right and the left. And I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders, whether we're in Congress, whether we're local pastors, to make sure those conversations don't happen after an incident, but are already beginning to develop specifically in these communities, to make sure that if something does happen that's egregious, that they understand that people are working together to overcome some of the stuff. Because a lot of these folks, we're designed, historically, we are a country of protest. But I think sometimes the story becomes on those from the outside who want to change the story with some of the writing and some of the other egregious acts.
Front page of the Charlotte Observer, courtesy of the museum in Washington, family and police at odds on what that video shows. The family wants it released to the public. Do you think it should be released?
I think at some point it should be. I understand sometimes with friends in law enforcement that you have to make sure during an investigation, if there's a potential trial, some of those aspects that you have to be careful. But I do appreciate showed it to the family, but I do think the community has a right to eventually be able to see that video.
You think it's okay at this point, though? I mean, with tensions as high as they are, to keep the public from not seeing it?
Well, like I said, I don't know what's in the video, and if there is certain things that affect a fair and speedy trial, you want to make sure that you're not putting someone in a very precarious situation. Like I said, I do approve of immediately, like they did, showing the family the video. I just don't know what it contains, if it could be harmful to evidence in a potential trial.
I want to invite our viewers to call in and ask your questions, give your comments here to Congressman Mark Walker, Republican of North Carolina. Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002. I also want to get your reaction to one of your colleagues from North Carolina. Here's the headline in the Hill newspaper: Charlotte protesters hate white people. And that comment coming from Robert Pittenger on Thursday in an interview with BBC, saying, said people are protesting in Charlotte because they hate white people and that welfare is holding them back from being successful.
Greta, I saw that last night. I was very troubled by those comments. I know Mr. Pittenger is a good-hearted person, a very generous person, but I do not agree with those comments in any way, shape, or form. I spent my life working in different places. I've spent time working in the inner cities of places like Cleveland, in New York, and Baltimore, worked in refugee camps overseas. I try to look beyond any kind of scope of political persuasion or race to make sure that as a person of faith, God teaches us to look on the heart when we can. And I don't approve of those comments, and I hope it was just a gross misspeak.
Is that reflective of the race relations in the state of North Carolina? Not
at all. We have many prominent supporters across different communities, across different racial lines. Not even we would even categorize as different. People have a right to protest. The civil rights movement began at a protest, and Martin Luther King Jr. and others did it with grace. Greensboro, my hometown, is famous. So you had David Richmond and Clarence Henderson and some of those guys at the old World War. They changed the course of our history and our future. So absolutely, people have a right to protest, and they should be able to. It's our First Amendment right. So I strongly encourage people who have a grievance to be able to protest. But obviously, there is a line that you can cross. But like I said, I don't believe a lot of that comes from some of the protesters.
Let's go to Rosie, who's up first for you, Congressman. In Houston, Texas, a Democrat. Hi, Rosie.
Hi. How you doing? First, I want to thank CSPAN for airing this so that people can say how they feel. And what I think about North Carolina, if they wait just a little while and see until I think they want to do the police want to view the tape and edit it whatever they want to on it. So you just have to wait for them and not be so quick to want to see what's happening. All these people in North Carolina can't do nothing about that anyway. But we are hurt. And if people would understand, they don't know about one person or one nation or they don't own North Carolina or the United States. We all come here from somewhere.
Okay, Rosie, let's get the reaction from the congressman.
Thanks for the call, Rosie. I kind of agree with our quarterback of the Carolina Panthers, probably the most prominent athlete in our state right now, Cam Newton, when he talks about accountability. But we got to be careful rushing to judgment, which I guess is the point that you were making. We do have to hold people accountable, which I believe it looks like I believe there was a charge of manslaughter for the officer who was charged with the shooting. We do hold people accountable. What we can't do is making sure that we're rushing to judgment in a way that hurts people, that damages our law enforcement, and I believe the verdict is still out, but as we see more and more evidence to see what decision we need to make in this particular case.
Caroline, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Democrat.
Yes, I'd like to ask the gentleman, Governor McCrory had placed, I seen him on the news channel here in Winston, WXII, and he had said that since Obama said that we had to have the cameras, he was going to, he wanted to be in control of when the cameras was released. That's why he put this law that says, it has to go through this, whatever to be released. They just couldn't release them. Instead of making it public, like the president said, it's more like he's not fighting, he's fighting Obama. He's saying, you can send the cameras, but I'm going to be the one say when to release them. So he gets on TV and says something about, what about the women's being raped? But what policeman going to come in and want to expose that? And it's mostly geared to African Americans from this same thing. So people now think the sheriff is in charge of this. Reason why he won't release them, it's not the sheriff. I mean, the chief of police.
Okay, Caroline, Congressman, do you know what the process is?
I know that the governor has jurisdiction to prevent those video or whatever the evidence is being released. I believe that's the local sheriff who
up to the investigators.
It's up to the investigators. I don't believe the governor has any jurisdiction over that.
Even Loretta Lynch yesterday at her news conference was asked, should the video be released? And she said that she was deferring to those that are investigating it, but that they're monitoring as well.
As tough as it is sometimes, whether it's the local sheriff, local law enforcement, local prosecutors, we have to have some kind of trust to be able for them to do the right thing.
Dee in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, Republican. Good morning.
Hi. I understand that there are some instances where you can question the reason for the shootings. But one thing that I don't like, and I have family in law enforcement, no one ever talks about every day how many police officers are shot. No one talks about when the police officers have to go into the projects and deal with the drug dealers and that, how the people in the communities will help hide the drug dealers and they will attack the police. That was one of the reasons why Caprini Green was shut down in Chicago. The people, even for the ambulance to go in and try and save people, they would shoot at them. How would the people in these communities feel if cameras or video feed was released on what they do in their communities? It's very one-sided, and I do understand people being upset. I do understand that, unfortunately, I don't think all police have been fair, but on the other hand, there's a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of wrong. And every day when my family goes out, they go out there to protect people that they don't even know.
Well, thank you for that call. I appreciate the heart behind it. And I want to tell you, I have a brother-in-law who is a K-9 officer unit. My wife is a flight trauma nurse who has flown into the various communities, leading with doing the right thing, with the right heart. You are correct. There are hundreds of thousands and hundreds of thousands of men and women who put on that uniform every day, the stories that don't make the headlines. And these heroes who are doing the work, spending their own money, their own time to trying to impact the community and make a difference. We seldom bring enough attention to these wonderful people. And it's an injustice not to be able to talk about some of the great work, whether it's the Sheriff's Department in our communities, whether it's the Police Department, so many men and women who put their lives on the line each and every day that we can have that freedom of speech. And we certainly thank them for their incredible efforts.
By the way, the caller referred to the risk for police officers. Line of duty deaths so far in 2016, 91. You can see how these police officers died. Due to gunfire, about 40 of the 91. You can see the rest of them there. Let's hear from Charles in Dallas, Texas, an independent.
Yes, I partially would like to respond to that last caller. A lot of people want to know why the anger is at the level that it is in the black community. I'd like to explain why. If you have a toxic waste site, which is the equivalent of slavery in America, a designated area for toxic waste, if you put that in a land for a specific amount of time, and then you decide, I want to make that land productive, it's going to take a lot of time, effort, and resources to change that land from being toxic to being productive. America has now wanted black people to be productive, but they're not willing to take the time, energy, and resources to change us from the toxic waste that we had of slavery to make us productive, because they do not feel like we're worth it.
Charles, I believe you're calling from Dallas. I don't know that I agree completely with those comments. I believe there are a lot of good investments and a lot of great people in all different communities who are already making a difference. I believe your sheriff there in Dallas is an example of that, who through his own personal tragedy and loss turned it into something that's really inspiring many, many people. He's recently retired, but how he handled some of the shootings that went on there showed a man of integrity and certainly a man of class, and a great role model for the rest of us in dealing with some of these race relations.
Donald Trump has said in reaction to what happened in North Carolina, one thing that he said was possibly a stop and frisk policy throughout the country. He walked that back, saying maybe just stop and frisk for Chicago. He said it worked in New York. Others say it didn't work in New York. Do you agree that we should have a stop and frisk policy?
I can't unequivocally agree that a stop and frisk is something that we should be instituting. I believe we have to be careful that we're not infringing on anybody's rights. Your rights, my rights, different communities, wherever you're from, whatever your background, whatever your socioeconomic status. The great thing about America is you and I should have the same equal rights with no favor to one class or the other.
Theda is next in Candler, North Carolina, Republican. Hi, Theda.
Good morning. I just had a few comments. I think one thing we need to do is stop referring to each other as black or white or African Americans. If we're living in this country, we are Americans. And it's embarrassing to see what's going on in our state. I feel like that in America, it doesn't matter what race or color you are, we all have an opportunity to succeed if you want to. And one suggestion I thought about was cutting off all the welfare and food stamps to people unless you're 65, older, or disabled. There's something about having to work for what you get that builds some character. And you would feel much better about yourself to go to the store and buy a TV rather than looting stores and stealing from people who have work to have. So I feel like that some of these things need to be addressed. We've given too much in this country, and people need to be accountable for what they are getting. And I appreciate the representative here and what he stands for. I appreciate the lady who called earlier, giving her thanks to the military and the police. I, too, want to do that. They're a special breed. Thank you.
Peter, yes, they are. For the amount of money that they make, they are certainly a special class of people. Let me address what you were talking about, one about the different races. We have to understand, from a sensitivity perspective, that it was only a generation ago where that oppression really did exist in the African American community, and even in some spots still today. So we want to come at this with certainly more of a compassion aspect than a condemnation one. To your point also about some of the welfare, we are out of control. Food stamps, welfare entitlements now make up close to 80%, along with paying the interest on our national debt, 80% of our mandatory spending. We can't sustain that. We've got to continue to be able to find a way to push back on some of that. But I believe through the process, it's going to take continued education, but it's also going to take some tough choices. We, as members of Congress, are going to have to be able to, at some point, say enough is enough. We've got to push back on some of the gross spending that we've seen here in Washington, D.C. It's in our first term. It is egregious, and part of the jobs, part of the legislation we've introduced is to help refine some of that mandatory spending and begin to reduce it and cut it. I think that's part of our job here in Washington, D.C.
Alyssa in North Carolina as well, Democrat. What's the name of your town? Is it Mebane?
Mebane.
Mebane.
I was corrected when I first moved here. You keep that straight. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for taking my call. I would first like to say I really appreciate the sincerity. I see it in his eyes. My question is, I have suffered quite a bit of a culture shock here. I was raised and educated up north and worked there my entire career as a professional nurse. And I have retired to Mebane, North Carolina, to discover that there is a fierce, very tight-knit system here of everything that's done, and there's a restriction on things here, like no other place I've ever worked or been in. Another way of putting it might be Jim Crow-ism. Is there anything that the congressman can think of that really might start moving this horrible, horrible curse off of the black community, especially down here in the South, in all parts of the South? It's not just North Carolina, as the congressman I'm sure well knows. And until we start really talking about what's actually happening, all of this is just, as the kids say, flipping your gums. And we have to do something. These children are not going to tolerate what my generation did, with the bent back and the bowed knee, saying, oh, well, we'll be good children and be respectful, grow up, and the black men get killed anyway because they look too big and like big bad dudes, and so you just get shot. There's no de-escalation training to our officers, and all respect to all good officers, but you have to admit there are some who are scared to death and they have a gun.
Okay, Alyssa, let's get the congressman to react to what you're saying.
Thank you, Alyssa. Appreciate the call. I certainly enjoy hearing from Mebane, North Carolina, the cities in our district. And I admire your past, being married to a nurse, talking about special groups of people. I don't know there's anybody more special than nurses who take care of certainly our sick in our community. As far as oppression, we're against all kinds of oppression. In any time that we see it, we're going to speak to it. It's been our life. It's been our heart. At the same time, we want to make sure that our language and our tone isn't creating additional issues or additional problems. That's part of my work as a political leader in that community, is to call anything that I see that's egregious out, and we're going to continue to do that. You're welcome to contact our office there. We actually have one about 10 miles from you in Graham, North Carolina. If there's any time specific concerns that you see, please let us know. At least I appreciate your call.
Effort, Pennsylvania. Fred's watching there, an independent.
Hi, good morning. Thank
Morning.
you for taking the call. I think part of the problem we're having with transparency in the police is that, when they have a videotape, they should release that stuff ASAP to de-escalate any kind of protest. And further, if there's something done wrong, then they can prosecute who they have to prosecute. But what happens when you delay with these tapes, it creates the opportunity for a perception of possibility of flaking. Flaking is a rogue police practice. They stop an innocent person or whatever like that. It gets into a terrible situation. The person gets killed. Next thing you know, a gun is planted. Oh, he had a gun. Or, drugs are planted. Oh, they had drugs. And it's like people in the family and the community know the person that they have nothing to do with guns or drugs. And, it just makes the credibility issue. And then you talk about drugs in this country and white-collar crime. The citizens that work for a living, everything that goes on in their life is a reflection of the leadership of this country. And you talk about scams and people paying too much money for things and all that's going on. We have got to get back to God, because God put us all here to love each other. And that is something that the politicians we currently have in Washington, D.C. have no respect for.
Well, I think our congressman here does.
Fred, I certainly appreciate that last comment. God does call on us to love each other, and I think if we can do a good job of that, it can really permeate some of the other issues and concerns that we have. Specifically to your issue, that we should immediately release the videotape. I have some concerns on it, because even if you and I were stopped over or pulled over, and I don't know that we would always want immediate video release until we have our certain rights or making sure that they're taken care of. And I also put some encumbrance on the community that there should be some patience before there is any kind of specifically hardline protests. Obviously, there's no call for violence or rioting regardless of any situation. But sometimes it's not just on the police department. And let's speak to that for just a second. Most law enforcement people that I know spent 25, 30, 35 years. My Guilford County Sheriff friend B.J. Barnes has been 40 years. Another, Terry Johnson, Alamance County. Many of these guys, there has been never any kind of history of any kind of gross negligence or any kind of targeting community. So I'm not saying they're not rogue situations or rogue officers from time to time, but I would put that percentage up against any other vocation. So I want to make sure as we talk about it that we're also bringing attention to those who have distinguished honor and careers at the same time that serve in a law enforcement.
How did you become a Baptist minister?
Well, Greta, I spent about 5 or 6 years in business and finance right out of college. And my mid-20s, my father was a minister. I promised that I would never do that. Sometimes, as we say, you never say never. But I went back to divinity school and served about 16 years there in the Winston-Salem, Greensboro, North Carolina area.
How do you think that impacts the work you do here?
There's an incredible parallel. Because as a pastor, you work from people from all walks of life, all different races, all different socioeconomic backgrounds. You lay out a vision, a clear objective. You learn sometimes there's arbitration involved. Sometimes there's mediation involved, whether it's a marital situation or a family situation. Sometimes there's many different sides of the story. But one of the things that helped me the most was to just listen. Instead of coming with a preconceived notion or ideas, to be able to hear, and I think transitioning over the last 3 years, into not being a career politician, obviously, but to go in the different communities and just to sit down and listen. Sometimes that means sitting on the back row of a church or you're visiting or in the different communities, but just understanding what's important to our different communities. I believe it to the place that unless you're willing to put the relationship before policy, policy is going to be weaker. In some places, doesn't even matter. The relationship has to be genuine.
Have you listened to the transgender community about the North Carolina bathroom? law.
We have, yes. We've heard loud and clear, absolutely.
And what's your position on that, and how does that impact your district?
Our district, I don't know, is quite as impacted immediately as it was the Charlotte, with it being birthed out of the Charlotte City Council. I struggle with, even though it's a state issue, I know the president a few months ago kind of doubled down on it when he issued his own executive order, a 6-page mandate. And there were 2 specific places that I struggled with. One that talked about allowing the student to override both the parental and teacher discretion. Now, if you think about that, students and children as young as 6 or 7 years old overriding both teachers and parental discretions. We've talked to families over the years that may have a child going through some kind of identity crisis or leaning one way or the other. A lot of times that's been discreetly handled between moms and dads and parents and teachers. To be able to take that out of their authority, I struggle with. But the biggest issue was, I think it was page 4 or 5, where the mandate talked about getting away from the stereotypes of masculinity and femininity. I have an innate struggle with that, primarily because of my faith, but also even science tells us in this move to push things toward this gender neutrality, there's a distinguished difference between male and female, and that I think we can overshoot the runway, and I think in this case, I think that's what we've done.
The NCAA has pulled out basketball tournament there. The ACC may follow suit. The Wall Street Journal says the city of Charlotte has lost more than $100 million in business from the fallout of the controversial state bathroom law. Are you seeing any economic impact as well?
Well, I think when you have people who travel throughout the state, Charlotte's a little over an hour from the Triad area, so you're going to have economic impact. If it affects Charlotte, it affects our entire state. And we have seen an impact. In fact, the ACC, they have pulled out as of last week, and a decision by Mr. Swafford there. It's damaging to us. It hurts us. NCAA's with Commissioner Director Mark Emmert, a little disappointed that he pulled the championships out and even returned some to his home community of Connecticut. I thought that was a little bit duplicitous on his part. But I think that we're going to have to come together to work out something that doesn't continue to impact us. Yet at the same time, I don't think it's outlandish. In fact, even most North Carolinians, some of the polling that we've seen, they don't have a problem with making sure that you keep the labels on the bathrooms, men and women's bathrooms. I don't think it's kind of crazy to even have that conversation at times, because most people would say, yes, I want my children to go in, if they're a daughter, I have 2, I want them to go into the female's restroom, and if I have a son, I'd like for him to go into the male's bathroom.
Let's go to Kansas. Janet's watching there, Republican.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. My comment is that if they want to suppression, why don't they take a trip to an Indian reservation? You talk about a lost society and what has been done to the American Indian. They live on reservations, pieces of ground. I mean, the tribes that live up north in our country, they are living in shacks. They don't have heat. They don't have air conditioning. They don't have storm sewers. They don't have their hand out. They're not out there saying that somebody, that somebody owes them something. You know, they can't get jobs. They can't get an education. It's a whole concept of lack of respect for the law enforcement officers, and who don't make enough money, in my opinion. And
Janet, can I jump in? Do you
sure.
think that you think in every incident it's because of a lack of respect?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
you know,
Congressman.
Well, I think even our court findings show that it can't be every incident. Listen, I work in the federal government, and sometimes the government's wrong. And part of our job is to be able to have the right to freedom of speech. Now, I do think that sometimes there's a gross exaggeration on some of the things, the charges, the accusations to our law enforcement side of trust but verify. I think we had a president that used to say that a lot, Ronald Reagan. But to say that every incident is due to lack of respect, I struggle, and I don't agree with that.
Pensacola, Florida. Eric, independent caller.
Yes, that's Derek.
Okay, sorry about that. Derek in Pensacola.
No problem. You know, the problem I'm having is every time I hear a Republican calling, the first thing they call and they complain, just like the last caller, it's all about disrespecting the police. No matter you wide open see that she shot that the police, she wasn't disrespect because it was just straight shot. And why is it that the people always think it has to do with welfare and handouts, and we're talking about a police shooting? That has nothing to do with welfare. So how is that always put together?
Okay, we'll talk about that with the congressman. You have any thoughts,
Derek,
sir?
thanks for taking the phone or calling in this morning. Familiar with Pensacola. I grew up in Milton. So my father was a minister there, about 10 miles from Pensacola. To your point here, I don't know that it may be some of the callers sometimes in a small pocket can skew it, but I know many Republicans who are working diligently and have a heart for all communities, whether people are on welfare, whether they're in school programs, whatever it might be. Part of our job, as the caller said earlier, is to making sure that we're looking from the spectrum as far as seeing these people the way that our faith calls us to see different folks, different people, whatever community, whether it's in the rural communities, whether it's in the urban communities. Sometimes a caller or two may call in and say, hey, as we just had, that every time this is a situation that's always on behalf of the victim and of the law enforcement. Our job is to look at each case individually, and that's what we're called to do, and that's what we try and do as well.
We'll go back to Florida. Pompano Beach, Cat, a Democrat.
Good morning. You're doing a good job in coming in and looking the camera in the face. You say you are a man of faith. I was wondering if you ever read Deuteronomy 28:68, because I didn't believe that the Bible was talking about the nation of Israel, which is the black people. The Lord, not the people, the Lord allowed the nation of Israel to come into slavery because of our disobedience. And you being a man of faith, I was just wondering, have you ever read Deuteronomy 28:68?
Okay, Kat, we'll have the congressman respond.
I actually have. In fact, I try to start each day reading a little bit there from the Bible, from some scriptures, kind of to help us focus through the day. If a theological discussion, I'm certainly happy to go that route. Maybe just in a brief comment, I do believe that I don't believe that the African American community is the same as Israel in the Bible, though there are some parallels when it comes to some of the oppression throughout history that both people groups have suffered over the years.
Tony in Claremont, Florida. Another call from Florida, independent.
I'm glad to talk to a man of faith. And my question is, when God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, He said, "I'm gonna put you in a land where I can teach you my ways." So that's the reason I believe slavery would never work in America. I mean, freedom for black people would never work in America, because the people that we had as slavery are the same people that we have to work under. You know, and the mentality is black people were just brought here just to do free labor. Without that, they were never brought here to be productive citizens, because even the meaning of the police was created just to round up slaves. So once we start getting that kind of mentality right, we will understand where God wants us to be. And I appreciate you letting me talk.
All right, Tony.
Yeah, Tony, thanks for the call. Historically, I'll put it this way, I recently had a chance to go and do a little preview of the African American Smithsonian. What a powerful, moving presentation. You can't walk through that place without your heart being just moved in incredible ways. At the same time, I don't believe that we can base current situations on things that happened sometime 200 and 300 years ago, sometimes, yes, decades ago. But we have to look at each situation differently. I get a chance to meet these wonderful people who serve in the capacity of law enforcement for sometimes meager wages, that take their work home, that serve this community, that are up on Saturdays volunteering their time, that are part of book drives, book packs, community workforce developments, all these different things that we see sometimes. So I want to make sure that as we look at these situations, we call out wrong where wrong is. Yet at the same time, we don't bypass all the good that, whether it's our local sheriff's departments, our local police departments, we want to make sure that we're understanding these are people that we live with each and every day in communities that are doing their best to make a difference in their own way.
C-SPAN is covering, by the way, the opening ceremony for the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, and that's this Saturday at 10 a.m. tomorrow. C-SPAN, cspan.org, or you can listen on the C-SPAN radio app as well. Pat in Long, South Carolina, a Republican. Pat, are you there?
Yes, I'm sorry. I was looking at TV and didn't see you.
Okay, listen through your phone. Go ahead.
Yes, I want to talk to the congressman about his committee that he's on.
Okay, you're on the air with him. Go ahead.
Okay. I want to talk to him about the committee he's on, the Oversight Committee,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is absolutely a waste of taxpayers' money. Y'all hold these meetings, and like the GSA, IRS, all of these people you find that's wasted money. You can't lock them up. You can't have them arrested. They get to retire with full benefits. Nothing is done for punishment. I would like to suggest that when a department of the federal government is caught cheating, stealing, abusing the taxpayers' money, that department's budget needs to be cut that amount of money. At least then you're doing something.
Okay, Pat, we'll take your suggestion.
Pat, thanks for your directness. I do appreciate it. I would push back a little bit. These are actual factual numbers. The House Oversight Committee has been able to force 20 out of the 23 resignations that we were looking for. Specifically, one that stands out was Michelle Leonhardt, the director of the DEA. When we found out that some of our Secret Service agents were behaving improperly with prostitutes in South America, I guess there's no way to pretty that up. We found out the penalty was only a slap in the wrist. In fact, it was 2 weeks paid leave of absence. That's a gross injustice for people that are supposed to be serving and protecting our president and other leaders. We were able to bring Ms. Leonhardt in on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and she resigns on a Friday. So we are having an impact. And even though it does cost money to do these investigations, our responsibility, kind of the hall monitors, if you will, we have full subpoena power, is to make sure that we're going after the different agencies that may be overstepping their boundaries. In this case, the DEA or the EPA, that we've had multiple hearings, but there are some results that are being, maybe we're not doing a good job of communicating or messaging some of the things that we're able to accomplish, but I believe the House Oversight Committee is a very important committee in the Congress.
You are supporting Donald Trump this election, North Carolina, a battleground state. What's his support like in the state?
Well, recent polling shows him up by 5%. In our district, specifically in the 6th district, he's up by 9% if you read or look at the polls. And I think that's of this week, actually, was the most recent poll. You
had some misgivings about him early on. Where are you now?
Well, I certainly support. When you say misgivings, my concern was some of the comments, specifically early on. I guess it was maybe you're basing your comments from a New York Times article that asked me, did I find some of his comments offensive? I said yes. But the second part of that, and I'm glad that they did publish that, is I find some of the things that Ms. Secretary Clinton has done certainly offensive as well. And you have to understand, Secretary Clinton is someone who has no problem with even third trimester abortions. She doesn't believe, she disagreed with the Supreme Court versus Heller to keep a gun in your home even only for self-defense. And I believe we're at a battle front right now of some of our religious liberties that are coming into play. And I would have great concerns with if Secretary Clinton was elected president.
Let's talk about Washington. You're here with us, and we thank you for staying in town, but many of your colleagues have already left because you're waiting on a deal to fund the government temporarily past this September 30th deadline. What have you been told about what are the holdups, what are the sticking points, and will this get resolved? Well,
a lot of it's been waiting somewhat impatiently on the Senate to be able to try to figure out specifically what they want to include in the CR as far as a continuing of funding the government, whether it's the short term or whether it's a longer term, the 6 months, sooner than later. Obviously, military construction, one of the things that we are concerned about, making sure that's funded to an ability that our men and women not only have the resources, but that we're being proactive, readiness, if you will, as we move forward. So we're waiting to see. Hopefully we'll have this resolved by the middle of next week.
Do you think it'll be a stopgap measure that goes until December 9th, or will it go past the election?
I believe what we're hearing is it will be December 9th. It will be the short term. We don't know for sure as far as what will all be worked out, but if I was, I believe they're looking at December 9th.
Okay. Congressman, we really appreciate your time this morning. Congressman Mark Walker, he's, as we said, a member of the Homeland Security Committee and sits on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee as well, Republican of North Carolina. Thank you for talking to our viewers.
Greta, it's been a privilege to be with you and to answer the calls as well.
Come back again.
We'll do it. Thank you.